March 10, 1993. A cold ditch outside Lake Andes, South Dakota. A sheriff looks down into runoff water along the highway. This place was searched before more than once. But today, something is floating there that wasn't there 3 months ago. What they found changed everything. And what they didn't find raises even more questions. To understand how we got here, we have to go back to one frozen night in December 1992. Lake Andes is a quiet dot in the middle of South Dakota. One gas station, a school, maybe a diner, but mostly silence. Winters here aren't just cold, they're brutal. Everything freezes. Roads, machines, people. And that silence can stretch on for miles. In December of 1992, 3 young people were heading home from a party in town. Arnold Arshambo, 20, Ruby Bruguier, 19, and Ruby's cousin, 17-year-old Tracy Dion. All native, all from the local Yankton Sioux tribe. Just 3 kids out for a ride in Arnold's Chevrolet Monte Carlo. The roads were slick with black ice that night. Nothing unusual. It's just part of winter here. But on Highway 281, near the intersection with a long-abandoned railroad line, Arnold lost control. The car slid off the highway, flipped, and landed upside down in a narrow drainage ditch. Half-frozen, snow-covered, just out of sight from passing drivers. Inside the overturned car, Tracy came to. She was strapped into the back seat, disoriented but conscious. Ruby was panicking in the front, shouting, "Oh my God," and slamming on the glass. But Arnold, who had been driving, was nowhere to be seen. He wasn't in the front seat. He wasn't outside. It was like he'd disappeared. Ruby somehow managed to climb out of the wreck. Tracy tried to follow, but just as she was getting out, the door swung shut. She was trapped. Emergency responders arrived not long after. They found the car flipped in the ditch, Tracy still inside. Cold. Shaken. Alive. Ruby was gone. So was Arnold. At first, police figured the couple had fled the crash site. Maybe Ruby was in shock. Maybe Arnold went looking for help. The wind chill was below zero, dangerous. Time mattered. But here's where it got strange. There were no footprints. No blood. No torn clothes. No sign that anyone had walked away. Nothing at all. Local officers, tribal police, and volunteers searched the area around the ditch. They combed through nearby fields, the old railroad line, and even the frozen lake. But they found no trace of Ruby or Arnold. No bodies. No evidence. Just an upside-down car and one scared teenager. The community held its breath. A missing persons report was filed. Flyers went up. But the longer the search dragged on, the colder the trail became, literally and figuratively. 2 teenagers had vanished without a trace, only feet from where one of them had been rescued alive. And the question that still haunts Lake Andes is this: if they didn't walk away, where did they go? When a car flips in the middle of a South Dakota winter, you expect damage. Maybe injuries. At worst, a fatality. What you don't expect is disappearance. When emergency responders pulled Tracy Dion from the overturned Monte Carlo, she was cold, scared, and alone. Her cousin Ruby Bruguier and Ruby's boyfriend Arnold Arshambo were simply gone. The response was immediate. Police marked off the scene. Officers questioned Tracy, took photos, and began coordinating a search. That same morning, tribal law enforcement, county deputies, and local volunteers began fanning out across the area. They had no idea how deep the mystery would go. According to official reports, the search grid extended in all directions. Crews covered fields, tree lines, fence gaps, and every visible trail in the snow. The surrounding landscape was open and exposed, flat South Dakota terrain with little cover and fewer places to hide. They followed every set of tracks. Most led nowhere. None led to Ruby or Arnold. They brought in dogs, helicopters, infrared cameras, everything you'd expect in a missing persons case. There were no footprints leading away from the car. No torn clothing. No wallets. No cell phone activity. Not that cell coverage was reliable in 1992, but there was nothing to work with. Not even discarded beer cans or cigarette butts to indicate where they might have gone. There was, simply, nothing. I spoke with a retired sheriff's deputy who was there that week. He told me, we covered miles. Fields, culverts, buildings, you name it. We even checked cattle tanks. We were expecting a body, or at least a trail, but it was like they disappeared into the snow. The prevailing theory early on was that Ruby and Arnold had walked away, possibly dazed, possibly injured, likely underdressed for the weather. It was dangerously cold that night. Sub-zero wind chills. Exposure would have killed them within hours. If they had gone on foot, they couldn't have gotten far. And yet, no one found them. Search efforts extended into the following week. Law enforcement canvassed nearby roads and old buildings. Tribal members combed the area by snowmobile. The railroad corridor, a few hundred feet from the crash site, was checked as a possible path. Maybe they followed the tracks. But the rails were frozen, the snow undisturbed. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood trail, no evidence they'd fallen through ice. Just absence. And slowly, the search turned into a vigil. In towns like Lake Andes, people remember. Flyers stayed taped to windows long after they faded. The reservation community talked in low voices. Everyone had a theory, but no one had answers. Were Ruby and Arnold hiding? Were they taken? Were they even still alive? 3 months passed. The snow began to melt, and when it did, so did the silence. March 10th, 1993. Almost exactly 3 months since the crash. The winter that had sealed Lake Andes in silence was starting to break. Snow turned to slush. The wind still cut sharp, but the air smelled different, like wet soil, like things buried too long starting to wake up. That morning, a local man driving to work noticed something odd near the highway. Just past the bend, where the land dipped slightly, runoff water had pooled, brown, shallow, and rippling from the melt. Something in the water caught his eye. Pale. Still. Human. He called it in. Responders arrived quickly. And there she was, face down, motionless in the mud and runoff. Ruby Bruguier. 3 months gone. And now she was back. No one could believe it. Not the sheriff, not the EMTs, not even the tribal officers who had searched the area back in December. The body was lying in a spot already checked. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't buried. It was right there. The medical examiner confirmed identity quickly. Clothing matched what Ruby had worn the night of the party. There were no signs of visible trauma. No gunshot wounds. No obvious blunt force. Hypothermia was listed as the probable cause of death. But that diagnosis raised more questions than it answered. I requested the autopsy report. What I got was limited. The body was partially decomposed, but not to the degree you'd expect from a body exposed to freezing water for 90 straight days. The skin was intact in places where ice should have torn it. The hair still clung to the scalp. The lungs showed some fluid, but not a full drowning. The stomach contents suggested she died not long after eating, possibly the night of the crash. But again, if she died that night, why didn't anyone find her before now? Law enforcement refused to speculate publicly. Unofficially, a few sources told me they were baffled. We don't miss bodies, one said. That area was searched extensively. They were talking about the general vicinity, not just the field, not just the ditch, but the surrounding landscape. People walked those edges with poles, flashlights, dogs. They looked under debris, inside culverts. Volunteers even retraced steps weeks after the initial effort. Still, no sign of Ruby. Until now. Locals started whispering again. Not about what had happened, but where it had happened. Was it possible Ruby had died elsewhere? Had she been placed here later? There was no blood. No sign of struggle. No sign she'd crawled or fallen into that spot. She was simply there, gently resting in meltwater, her arms near her sides. And then something stranger happened. The very next day, March 11th, another body was found. This time, a little closer to the crash site. Another male, partially submerged in muddy runoff. It was Arnold Arshambo. March 11th, 1993. One day after Ruby was found. The search team returned to the area, not to look for more bodies, but to drain out the runoff water. They needed to preserve the scene, get a clearer picture of how Ruby had ended up where she did. Maybe check for evidence. It was standard procedure. What they weren't expecting was to find Arnold. He was lying partially submerged, just a few steps away, no more than 15 feet from where Ruby had been found the day before. 15 feet. And just like with Ruby, the location had already been searched. Repeatedly. The mud wasn't deep, and the water wasn't high. Visibility was low, but not that low. Everyone on scene said the same thing. He couldn't have been here this whole time. But there he was. Arnold Arshambo. Missing since December. Now found in the exact zone where no one thought to look, because everyone already had. Again, no obvious trauma. No gunshots. No defensive wounds. The body was intact. The autopsy ruled his cause of death the same as Ruby's: exposure. Hypothermia. But I've seen the reports. And I've spoken to pathologists. Here's what doesn't add up. 3 months in open cold should leave signs. Skin should be damaged, digits blackened, clothing stiff, tissue degraded. But Arnold's skin was still pliable, hair still rooted, no visible frostbite, no bloating, no slippage. Nothing consistent with a body that had spent a full South Dakota winter exposed to moisture and fluctuating temperatures. Then there's the positioning. His arms lay loosely at his sides, legs slightly bent, like he had simply lain down in shallow water and stopped breathing. Forensics found no drag marks, no soil disruption, no sign of movement. It was like he had just appeared. Which brings up the question no one wants to ask. If Arnold and Ruby had died the night of the crash, how were they not found in 3 months of searching? And if they weren't there all along, where had they been? I tried pressing local law enforcement for answers. Most refused to speak. A few repeated the official line. They succumbed to the elements. Plain and simple. But it wasn't plain. It wasn't simple. And nobody could explain how 2 adult bodies could lie within spitting distance of a public road during an active missing persons case and not be discovered. There were no arrests, no new leads, no new suspects, just a quiet closing of files and the sound of a town trying to forget what didn't make sense. But what if the truth isn't in what they found, it's in when they found it? By now, you've probably asked yourself the same question I did. Is it possible Ruby and Arnold were in that field the entire time? It sounds like a simple yes or no. But in this case, the question might be the most dangerous part. I revisited the crash site in early spring, standing right where the Monte Carlo had overturned. The ditch is narrow, maybe 4 feet across, and shallow. The terrain dips slightly, then levels out toward the railroad embankment. Nothing here is hidden. Visibility stretches in all directions. You could spot a glove in the grass from 50 feet away. So again, how were 2 full-grown bodies missed for 90 days? Let's look at the official theory first. Theory 1. They were there all along, hidden by ice. This is the cleanest explanation, and the one law enforcement unofficially leaned on. It goes like this. The bodies landed in the ditch. Water and ice covered them. Snow concealed what little was visible. By spring, meltwater exposed them. I asked independent forensic experts if this was plausible. One said, yes, but unlikely. Even in freezing conditions, decomposition continues, especially in partial submersion. You'd expect discoloration, bloating, skin slippage. Based on the reports, that didn't happen here. Another added, you're telling me 2 bodies lay in a 50-foot ditch, 20 feet from a road, during a full-scale search, and no one stepped on them? Sorry, I don't buy it. Theory 2. They died somewhere else, and were moved. This theory cuts deeper. If Ruby and Arnold weren't in that field from the beginning, then someone moved them there. When? How? And most importantly, why? This idea comes up in hushed conversations around Lake Andes. Nobody says it directly, but people know. What if they'd been held somewhere, alive or dead, and then placed near the crash site once the heat had died down? Maybe the person responsible thought it was safe. Maybe it was symbolic. Maybe it was a message. This version doesn't just challenge the official narrative, it implicates someone. Which is likely why no agency ever pursued it seriously. There were no warrants, no follow-up interviews, no forensic timelines. Just a quiet conclusion, death by exposure. But there's one more theory, the one nobody puts in reports. Theory 3, they were taken by someone or something. You hear it whispered in reservation bars, in the back pews at church, in elders' voices just above a breath. That they didn't die that night. That they were seen alive, briefly, in the weeks that followed. That maybe, just maybe, someone didn't want them found. I tracked down one local who told me off the record. There's stuff that happens out here, things that don't show up on paper. Sometimes people disappear, and you're not supposed to ask why. I pressed, you think they were murdered? He just stared at the floor and said, I think they weren't supposed to come back. No charges were filed. No reopened case. Just Ruby and Arnold. Together again in death, but never fully accounted for. By spring of 1993, the story of Ruby Bruguier and Arnold Arshambo was no longer breaking news. It was just another tragedy. There was no second investigation, no press conference, no justice. The official record says they died of hypothermia. The unofficial truth is no one really knows when or where. I returned to Lake Andes one last time. The grass had started to grow back near the ditch. The water had dried up. The mud had hardened. If you drove past the spot today, you wouldn't notice anything unusual. No marker. No cross. Just flat land and the faint smell of wet dirt. But for those who knew Ruby and Arnold, the ground still speaks. I met with a family friend, someone who had helped with the original search. She didn't want to go on camera. Just sat on the porch, staring out past the fields. I asked her what she thought really happened. She shook her head slowly and said, "They weren't supposed to be found. But they came back anyway." That stuck with me. Because if Ruby and Arnold had truly been abandoned, left to freeze and vanish, then this story is about neglect. But if they were hidden, moved, silenced, and returned, then it's about something far worse. It's about fear. Fear that justice here doesn't come unless you're in the right zip code. Fear that when Native kids go missing, nobody keeps looking. Fear that truth is just another thing that disappears. I contacted multiple law enforcement agencies during the making of this story. None agreed to speak on the record. The tribal police chief at the time has since retired. The medical examiner declined to comment. No charges have ever been filed. No suspect has ever been named. The case remains closed. But it shouldn't be. What happened to Ruby and Arnold isn't just a mystery. It's a mirror. A reflection of how this country treats the voiceless. Of what's allowed to happen in the gaps. Of the silence we bury things in and call it resolution. If you've made it this far, maybe you feel it too. That feeling you get when something doesn't sit right. When a case closes but nothing's finished. Ruby Bruguier was 19. Arnold Arshambo was 20. They mattered. And their story isn't over. Because when a ditch gives back what the system tried to forget, someone has to keep asking why.